You know what nobody tells you about being the family expert? That the people you help build their dreams might one day use your skills as evidence against you. Let me tell you about Grace. Grace Chen was 24 years old when she passed her CPA exam on the first try. Top 5% of her class. Job offers from 3 of the big 4 accounting firms. A brilliant future stretching out before her like an open road. Her grandmother threw her a party. Nothing fancy, just family gathered in the backyard of the old house where Grace had grown up after her parents died. Her grandmother Lynn had raised her from age 7, working double shifts at the hospital to put Grace through college. "I'm so proud of you, Bao Bei," her grandmother whispered, holding Grace's face in her weathered hands. "You're going to do amazing things." Grace looked around at her extended family. Uncle Richard and his wife Maureen. Her cousins Brandon and Kyle. Aunt Susan and her husband. Second cousins. Third cousins. People who'd shown up for free food but had never shown up when Grace and her grandmother needed help during the hard years. "Grandma," Grace said quietly. "I want to help you. Let me manage your finances. Make sure you're set for retirement. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears. "Grace, you don't owe me anything." "I know. But I want to. Please." That's how it started. Grace took one of those prestigious job offers, but every evening and weekend, she managed her grandmother's finances. Organized her investments. Handled her taxes. Made sure every dollar was working as hard as her grandmother had worked all those years. 6 months later, Uncle Richard approached her at a family dinner. "Grace, I heard you're doing Grandma's finances now," he said, his voice carrying that tone successful people use when they're about to ask for a favor. "My restaurant's books are a mess. My accountant quit. You think you could take a look? Just temporarily, of course. Family rate." Grace looked at her grandmother, who squeezed her hand. 3 generations of family helping family. "Of course, Uncle Richard. No charge. We're family." That was 18 years ago. 18 years of Grace building other people's empires while living in a modest 1-bedroom apartment. Uncle Richard's single struggling restaurant became a chain of 7 thriving locations. Grace restructured his finances, found tax advantages he'd never known existed, negotiated better supplier contracts, implemented inventory systems that saved him hundreds of thousands. "You're a miracle worker, Grace," he'd say, usually while showing off his new luxury car or talking about his vacation home in Cabo. Then cousin Brandon started a small marketing agency. "Grace, can you help me set up my business accounting? Just until I get established." She did. For free. His agency grew into a firm with 23 employees. Cousin Kyle opened a boutique coffee roasting company. "Grace, I don't understand anything about quarterly taxes or payroll. Help?" She helped. His company expanded to supply coffee to restaurants across 3 states. Aunt Susan and her husband bought rental properties. "Grace, we need someone to manage the books for our properties." "We trust you." Grace managed 7 properties. Optimized their rental income. Saved them from costly mistakes. Never charged a penny. One by one, 15 family members came to her. Businesses. Investments. Taxes. Estate planning. Complex financial restructuring. Grace handled it all. Every evening after her full-time job at a mid-size accounting firm, she'd come home and work on family finances. Weekends were spent organizing records, filing taxes, meeting with family members about their businesses. Her own career? She'd turned down 3 promotions because they would have required moving or longer hours, and she couldn't abandon her family's financial needs. Couldn't let them down. Her personal life? Non-existent. She'd dated briefly in her 20s, but relationships fell apart when she spent every weekend working on Uncle Richard's restaurant chain expansion or cousin Kyle's distribution contracts. "You need to live your own life," her grandmother would say gently, watching Grace work at the kitchen table late into the night. "I am living my life, Grandma. I'm helping family. That's what matters." "But Grace, they have money now. They could hire accountants. You shouldn't be doing this for free. They're family. You taught me family takes care of family." Her grandmother would sigh but say nothing more. Because Grace was right. That's what Lynn had taught her. That's how Grace had been raised. But here's what Grace didn't see. The way Uncle Richard and Aunt Maureen would exchange glances when Grace showed up in her sensible sedan while they drove luxury SUVs. The way they'd comment on her quaint little apartment when they lived in a house with 6 bedrooms and a pool. The way cousins Brandon and Kyle would laugh about good old Grace at family gatherings. How she'd never gotten married. Never traveled. Never seemed to have any fun. Just worked and worked and worked. She's so dedicated, Maureen would say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Must be nice not to have any real responsibilities. Never mind that Grace's meticulous financial management had made Richard's restaurant chain worth $12 million. Never mind that her tax strategies had saved the family collectively over $2 million. Never mind that her advice had prevented costly mistakes that would have bankrupted half of them. They saw her modest lifestyle and assumed she was simple, unsuccessful, someone to be pitied rather than respected. Only her grandmother knew the truth. Grace, Lynn said one evening when Grace was 42 and had been managing family finances for 18 years. I need to talk to you about my will. Grandma, we don't need to. Yes, we do. Her grandmother's voice was firm. I'm 89 years old. We need to talk about it. So they did. Lynn's estate was modest compared to what Richard and the others had accumulated. The old house, worth maybe $300,000. Savings and investments, about $200,000 more. Small, but meaningful. I'm leaving the house and the money to you, Grace, Lynn said. Not because you're my favorite, but because you're the only one who needs it. The only one who sacrificed her own life to help everyone else build theirs. Grandma. And because you're the only one who loved me for me. Not for what I could give you. Not for status or money or connections. Just love. Grace held her grandmother's hand. It was so small. So fragile. When had she gotten so old? I love you, Grandma. More than anything. I know, Baobei. I know. 3 months later, Lin Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep. Grace found her in the morning, lying in the bed where she'd spent 60 years of her life, peaceful, finally resting after 9 decades of hard work and hard love. The funeral was large. All 15 family members Grace had helped over 18 years showed up in their expensive cars, wearing their designer clothes, carrying their luxury handbags. Grace stood by the casket in her simple black dress, the same one she'd worn to every family funeral for the past decade because she couldn't afford to keep buying new ones. Uncle Richard gave a beautiful eulogy about what a wonderful mother Lynn had been, how she'd taught them all about family and loyalty and hard work. Maureen dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Brandon and Kyle served as pallbearers, looking appropriately solemn. After everyone else left the cemetery, Grace stayed. She sat in the grass beside the fresh grave and talked to her grandmother like she had every Sunday for 42 years. I'm going to miss you so much, Grandma. You were the only person who really saw me. Who knew that I wasn't just the family accountant. I was Grace. You're Grace. The autumn wind rustled through the cemetery trees. I hope I made you proud. I know I didn't build some big career or make a lot of money or have a fancy life, but I helped people. Our family. Your family. I kept them safe, kept them successful. That counted for something, right? Silence. Just the wind and the distant sound of traffic. I love you, Grandma. Thank you for raising me. Thank you for teaching me what matters. Thank you for seeing me. Grace stood up slowly, brushing grass from her dress. She had no idea, absolutely no idea, that in 1 week's time everything would change. That the family she'd sacrificed 18 years for would turn on her. That Uncle Richard had been planning something during all those years she'd made him wealthy. Something cruel. Something calculated. Something that would use her own meticulous record-keeping against her. As Grace walked back to her modest sedan, the only car left in the cemetery parking lot, she believed she was alone but supported by 18 years of good work and family loyalty. She had no way of knowing she was walking into an ambush. That her uncle had been building a case against her. That the very skills that had made them all wealthy would be twisted into evidence of crimes she never committed. That in 7 days, she would be accused of stealing $3 million, and that every single family member, every person she'd helped build from nothing into success, would believe she was guilty. Grace drove home through the quiet streets, grief sitting heavy in her chest. She thought the worst pain was losing her grandmother. She was wrong. The real betrayal was just beginning. Grace spent the week after the funeral doing what she always did. Working. She filed Cousin Brandon's quarterly taxes. Reconciled Uncle Richard's restaurant payroll. Reviewed Aunt Susan's rental property expenses. All while processing her own grief in the quiet hours of the night. Her grandmother's house sat empty. Grace couldn't bring herself to go there yet. Couldn't face the silence. The absence. The memories in every corner. She'd deal with the estate paperwork soon. Right now, she just needed to keep moving, keep working, keep being useful. That's what she did. That's who she was. 7 days after the funeral, on a gray Monday morning, Grace received a certified letter. She signed for it at her apartment door, confused. Certified mail usually meant something official. Something important. She opened it standing in her small kitchen, still holding her morning coffee. The letterhead made her stomach drop. Hammond and Associates, attorneys at law. Dear Ms. Chen. We represent Richard Chen and Chen Family Enterprises in matters relating to financial irregularities discovered in business accounts under your management. Our client has identified substantial evidence of embezzlement and financial fraud committed over a period of multiple years. You are hereby formally notified that criminal complaints and civil lawsuits will be filed against you unless this matter is resolved immediately. Our client is prepared to pursue full criminal prosecution including charges of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. A family meeting has been scheduled for Wednesday, October 15th at 6 p.m. at the offices of Hammond and Associates to discuss resolution of this matter. Your attendance is mandatory. Failure to appear will be considered an admission of guilt and will result in immediate legal action. Sincerely, Robert Hammond, Esquire. Grace read it 3 times. Embezzlement, fraud, criminal prosecution. Her hand started shaking so badly she had to set down her coffee cup. This had to be a mistake. Some terrible, impossible mistake. She grabbed her phone and called Uncle Richard. It went straight to voicemail. She called Aunt Maureen. No answer. Brandon. Kyle. Aunt Susan. Every number went to voicemail or rang unanswered. Grace stood in her kitchen, the letter trembling in her hands, and felt the world tilting sideways. Wednesday arrived with the weight of an execution date. Grace drove to the law offices of Hammond and Associates in a daze. She'd barely slept in 2 days. Barely eaten. Her mind kept spinning through 18 years of financial records, trying to understand what could possibly be wrong. Every transaction had been documented. Every dollar accounted for. Every decision made with the family's best interests in mind. She was a CPA. Meticulous record-keeping wasn't just her job, it was who she was. The law office was in one of those gleaming downtown buildings with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The kind of place that screamed money and power. Grace rode the elevator to the 14th floor wearing her only suit, the one she'd bought 7 years ago for a job interview she'd turned down because Uncle Richard had needed help with a restaurant expansion. The receptionist looked at her with something like pity. The conference room is this way, Ms. Chen. Grace followed her down a hallway lined with oil paintings and expensive furniture. The conference room doors opened. And there they were. All of them. Uncle Richard sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, his expensive suit perfectly tailored. Aunt Maureen beside him, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Brandon and Kyle flanking them like bodyguards. Aunt Susan and her husband. 2 more cousins Grace had helped over the years. 15 family members. Every single person whose financial success Grace had built. All of them staring at her like she was a stranger. A criminal. A threat. Robert Hammond sat at Richard's right hand, a folder thick with documents in front of him. Ms. Chen, please sit. His voice was cold. Professional. The voice of someone who'd done this many times before. Grace sat in the single chair across from all of them. Alone. Uncle Richard, she started, her voice barely a whisper. What's going on? I don't understand. Richard wouldn't meet her eyes. Just stared at the table, his jaw tight. Hammond opened his folder. Ms. Chen, my client has discovered substantial financial irregularities in accounts you've managed over the past 18 years. Specifically, we have evidence of systematic embezzlement totaling approximately $3.2 million. The room spun. That's impossible. I never. Hammond slid a stack of papers across the table. Bank statements showing regular transfers from Chen Family Enterprises accounts to offshore accounts in your name. Documentation of falsified expense reports. Evidence of inflated billing and kickback schemes with vendors. Grace grabbed the papers with shaking hands. Started reading. The bank statements showed her name. Account numbers she'd never seen before. Transfers of thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Over and over. 4 years. These aren't mine, Grace said, her voice rising with panic. I don't have these accounts. I've never seen these before. The accounts are in your name, Ms. Chen. Hammond's voice was relentless. Your social security number. Your signature on the opening documents. He slid more papers across. There was her signature. Over and over. On account applications. On transfer authorizations. on documents she'd never seen in her life. "This is fake," Grace whispered. "Someone forged these. I never signed." "We also have testimony," Hammond continued, ignoring her. "From family members who witnessed suspicious behavior. Times when you insisted on handling certain transactions alone. Refused to let anyone else review certain accounts. Became defensive when questioned about financial decisions." Grace looked up at her family. "You told them I was suspicious?" "I was protecting your privacy. Following your instructions. You asked me to handle things quietly." Uncle Richard finally spoke. His voice was flat, empty. "Grace, we trusted you. For 18 years, we trusted you. And you stole from us." "I never stole anything." Grace's voice cracked. "Uncle Richard, you know me. I've given up everything to help this family." Maureen leaned forward, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "Grace, sweetie, we know you've had struggles. Living in that tiny apartment all these years. Never getting married. Never having your own life. We understand that you might have felt entitled to take a little extra. To make up for what you sacrificed." "I didn't take anything." Brandon spoke up, his voice cold. "Grace, we've all seen how you live. So modestly. We thought you were just frugal. But now we understand. You were hiding the money. Playing the martyr while stealing millions. That's insane." Grace stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I live modestly because I spent every free moment working for all of you. For free. I turned down promotions, relationships, my own life, to help you build your empires." "Empires you were stealing from," Kyle added. "The whole time." Grace looked from face to face, searching for someone, anyone, who believed her. Aunt Susan wouldn't meet her eyes. The cousins she'd helped start their businesses looked at her with disgust. Every single person in that room had already decided she was guilty. Hammond cleared his throat. "Ms. Chen, my client has already filed a report with the State Accounting Board. Your CPA license will be suspended pending investigation. We've also prepared documentation for criminal charges, embezzlement, fraud, theft. You're looking at significant prison time." Grace felt her knees go weak. Her entire career. Her reputation. Her freedom. Everything. However, Hammond continued, "My client is willing to resolve this matter quietly. To spare the family the embarrassment of a public trial and to spare you the trauma of criminal prosecution." He slid one more document across the table. "This is a settlement agreement. You will sign over your inheritance from Lin Chen, the house and all associated funds, approximately $500,000 total, to Richard Chen as restitution for the funds you stole. You will also sign a confession admitting to the embezzlement. In exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges." Grace stared at the paper. At her grandmother's house. Her grandmother's money. The only thing Lynn had left her. "You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit and give you grandma's house?" "We want you to make restitution for what you stole," Richard said, his voice hard. "And yes, given that your theft exceeded $3 million, we're being extraordinarily generous by only requiring $500,000. I didn't steal anything." Grace was shouting now, tears streaming down her face. "How can you do this? After 18 years? After everything I gave up for you? Everything you gave up?" Maureen's voice turned sharp. "Grace, you didn't give up anything. You had no career. No prospects. No life. We gave you purpose. Gave you meaning. And you repaid us by stealing." "That's not true." "The evidence doesn't lie," Hammond interrupted. "You have 48 hours to sign this agreement, Ms. Chen. After that, we file criminal charges and you can explain your innocence to a jury. With this much documentation, I'd estimate you're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." Grace looked at Uncle Richard one last time. The man she'd made wealthy. The man whose restaurants had been failing before she rescued them. The man who'd asked for her help and promised it was just temporary. "Uncle Richard, please. You know me. You know I would never." Richard finally met her eyes. And what she saw there made her blood run cold. Not anger. Not disappointment. Satisfaction. "Sign the paper, Grace," he said quietly. "Take the deal. Walk away. Start over. It's the best offer you're going to get. And if I don't?" Hammond stood up, gathering his documents. "Then we'll see you in court. And in prison. Your choice, Ms. Chen. You have 48 hours. He walked out. The family members stood up, one by one, following him. Not one of them looked back at Grace. Not one of them said goodbye. Aunt Susan paused at the door. For a moment, Grace thought, hoped. "I'm sorry, Grace," Susan whispered. But the evidence is pretty clear. Maybe you should just sign." Then she was gone too. Grace stood alone in that massive conference room, surrounded by leather chairs and oil paintings and the cold smell of money. 18 years. 18 years of her life, her work, her sacrifice. And they believed she was a thief. Worse, they wanted her to confess to it. To give up the only thing her grandmother had left her. To sign away her truth and accept their lies. Grace walked out of that building in a daze. Got in her car. Sat there in the parking garage, hands on the steering wheel, unable to move. Her phone buzzed. Text messages. From family members who hadn't been at the meeting. Asterisk Grace, I heard what happened. I can't believe it. Asterisk. Asterisk how could you steal from us? We trusted you. Asterisk. Asterisk don't try to contact me. I want nothing to do with you. Asterisk. One by one. Every family member. Every person she'd helped. Every relationship she'd built over 18 years. All of them turning their backs. Believing the worst. Abandoning her. Grace finally started the car and drove. Not to her apartment. She couldn't face that emptiness. She drove to her grandmother's house. The house that would be taken from her if she didn't confess to crimes she never committed. She sat in the driveway as the sun set, staring at the place where she'd been raised. Where she'd been loved. Where she'd learned that family meant everything. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Asterisk Grace, you're honest to your bones. Never let anyone take that from you. Asterisk. But what choice did she have? Sign the paper and lose her grandmother's house but avoid prison? Or fight and risk losing everything, including her freedom? With evidence she'd never seen. Signatures she'd never made. Accounts she'd never opened. How could she fight something so perfectly constructed to destroy her? Grace finally got out of the car and walked to the front door. Used her key, maybe for the last time. The house smelled like her grandmother. Jasmine tea and old books and love. She walked through the rooms in the darkness. The kitchen where they'd had breakfast together every Sunday. The living room where her grandmother had taught her to balance a checkbook when she was 12. The bedroom where Lynn had told her she was proud. Where she'd said Grace didn't owe her anything but Grace had wanted to give everything anyway. Grace sank onto her grandmother's bed and finally, let herself break. 18 years of holding it together. Of being the responsible one. Of sacrificing her own needs for everyone else. It all came crashing down. She sobbed until she had no tears left. Until her throat was raw and her head was pounding and the darkness outside the windows was complete. 48 hours. 48 hours to decide between her truth and her freedom. How do you choose between your integrity and your life? Grace didn't know. But as she lay there in her grandmother's bed, surrounded by memories of the only person who'd ever truly known her, something shifted. A thought. Small at first. Then growing. Uncle Richard had said the evidence didn't lie. But evidence could be fabricated. And Grace was an accountant. She knew how numbers worked, how documents were created, how paper trails were constructed. And she'd spent 18 years creating the most meticulous financial records any CPA had ever kept. Every transaction. Every email. Every receipt. Every decision. All documented. All filed. All backed up in multiple locations because that's what good accountants did. Grace sat up slowly. 18 years of her own records. Her own evidence. Her own truth. Could it be enough? Could it prove what she knew in her bones? That someone had set her up? That those offshore accounts weren't hers? That those signatures were forged? She didn't know. But she knew where to start. Grace stood up and walked to the study, her grandmother's study, where she'd spent countless evenings working on family finances. The filing cabinets were still there, packed with 18 years of records. Her laptop was on the desk, connected to cloud storage with complete backups of every file she'd ever created. External hard drives with redundant backups because Grace never trusted just one system. 18 years of truth. If Richard had set her up, if those accounts were fake, if those signatures were forged, then somewhere in these records would be proof. Grace opened her laptop. And for the first time since receiving that certified letter, she felt something besides fear. She felt purpose. 48 hours wasn't much time. But it was enough to start looking. Enough to start fighting. Enough to remember who she was. Not a thief. Not a criminal. An accountant. And accountants, they followed the money. Grace cracked her knuckles and opened the first file. Time to find out who was really stealing from the Chen family. Grace didn't leave her grandmother's house for 3 days. She called in sick to work. Didn't answer her phone. Didn't check her messages. Just worked. The dining room table became her war room. Laptop open. External hard drives connected. 18 years of financial records spread across every surface. Bank statements. Tax returns. Receipts. Contracts. Emails. Text messages. Every single piece of documentation she'd ever created for the Chen family. She started with Uncle Richard's restaurant chain. The business where the largest amounts of stolen money allegedly came from. Grace pulled up her original records. Every transaction she'd ever processed. Every expense she'd approved. Every transfer she'd authorized. Then she compared them to the doctored statements Hammond had shown her. The discrepancies were subtle. Sophisticated. Someone who knew accounting had done this. But they weren't perfect. Grace found the first crack at 2 a.m. on the second night. A transfer dated March 15, 2018. The fake statement showed $75,000 moving from the restaurant's operating account to one of the mysterious offshore accounts in Grace's name. But Grace had her original bank statement from that exact date. Saved as a PDF. Timestamped. Downloaded directly from the bank's secure portal. No such transfer existed. The $75,000 had gone to a legitimate kitchen equipment supplier. Grace had the invoice. The delivery confirmation. The warranty documents. Someone had taken that transaction and digitally altered the destination account. Grace's hand shook as she highlighted the discrepancy. One down. Dozens to go. She worked through the night. Coffee going cold beside her. Her grandmother's reading lamp the only light in the dark house. Transaction after transaction. Comparing the fake statements to her originals. Every single theft Hammond had documented was actually a legitimate business expense. Equipment purchases. Supplier payments. Payroll. Tax payments. Real transactions, with the destinations digitally altered to make it look like the money had gone to offshore accounts instead. But why would Richard do this? He was wealthy. Successful. What could he possibly gain from framing Grace? Grace leaned back in her chair, rubbing her burning eyes. Then she remembered something. 6 months ago, Uncle Richard had called her. Asked her to look at some unusual activity in the restaurant accounts. Said his new bookkeeper had found some discrepancies. Grace had investigated. Found nothing wrong. Told Richard everything was fine. He'd seemed disappointed? No. She'd dismissed it at the time. Thought she was imagining things. But now, Grace pulled up her files from that investigation. Reviewed her notes. Richard had specifically asked about certain accounts. Certain time periods. Almost like he was fishing for something. Like he wanted her to find problems that didn't exist. Grace's mind raced. What if this had been planned for months? What if Richard had been setting her up? But why? She opened her email archives. Started searching for correspondence with Richard from the past year. Most of it was routine. Financial reports. Tax planning. Business decisions. Then she found something odd. An email from Richard. 8 months ago. Marked urgent. Asterisk Grace, we need to talk about Grandma's will. I think there might be some irregularities. Can you review the estate planning documents? Privately. Don't mention this to anyone else in the family. Asterisk. Grace had responded that she'd be happy to review anything, but that she wasn't the executor. Richard was. He'd have access to everything. He'd never followed up. Why had he asked about the will? Grace felt ice water flood her veins. The will. Her grandmother's will that left Grace the house and $200,000. What if Richard wanted it? No. That was crazy. Richard was worth millions. Why would he care about a modest inheritance? Unless. Grace opened a new search. Started looking through Richard's restaurant financial records. The ones she maintained. The real ones. She'd always been meticulous about separating business accounts from personal accounts. But Richard was the owner. He could move money between them whenever he wanted. Grace started tracking the patterns. Large withdrawals from the business accounts. Always categorized as owner distributions or management fees. Completely legal. But the frequency had increased dramatically over the past 2 years. Grace pulled up the restaurant chain's profit and loss statements. Revenue was steady. Even growing slightly. But the cash reserves were lower than they should be. Much lower. She cross-referenced with tax returns. The restaurants were showing healthy profits. Paying appropriate taxes. Everything looked legitimate. But when Grace dug into the actual cash flow, the money that should have been accumulating in the business accounts, it wasn't there. Where was it going? Grace spent the next 6 hours following the trail. Owner distributions to Richard's personal account. fine. But then, transfers out of Richard's personal account to, she squinted at the screen, an LLC she'd never heard of. Chen Holdings International. That wasn't one of the businesses Grace managed. She'd never seen this entity before. She searched her files. Nothing. She searched her emails. Nothing. Richard had never mentioned this company. Grace grabbed her phone. Opened her browser. Searched for Chen Holdings International. The company existed. Registered in Delaware 2 years ago. Officers listed as Richard Chen and James Morrison. Who was James Morrison? Grace searched that name. Found a LinkedIn profile. International tax consultant. Specializing in offshore asset protection. Her stomach dropped. Offshore asset protection. Grace went back to the financial records. Started adding up all the transfers from Richard's personal account to Chen Holdings International. $2.8 million. Over the past 2 years. Money that had been legitimately distributed from the restaurants to Richard, then moved to an offshore tax shelter. Completely legal if done properly and disclosed correctly. But Grace pulled Richard's personal tax returns. The ones she'd filed for him. No mention of Chen Holdings International. No disclosure of offshore accounts. No reporting of the asset transfers. That wasn't legal. That was tax evasion. Grace sat back, her mind spinning. Richard had been hiding money offshore. Evading taxes. And if the IRS ever investigated, if they ever traced those transfers, they'd look at who managed Richard's finances. They'd look at Grace. She'd filed those tax returns. She'd be the one who'd face questions about why the offshore transfers weren't disclosed. Unless Richard could prove it wasn't his fault. Unless he could prove someone else had been stealing. Someone else who'd made the accounting look questionable. Someone like Grace. Oh God. This wasn't about her grandmother's inheritance at all. This was about covering up Richard's own crimes. By framing Grace for theft, Richard created a scapegoat. If the IRS came looking, he could say Grace had been embezzling. That she'd been the one hiding money. That he was a victim too. The fake offshore accounts in Grace's name. The doctored bank statements. The forged signatures. All of it designed to create a paper trail showing Grace as a criminal, while Richard walked away clean. Grace felt like she couldn't breathe. 18 years. 18 years of loyal service. And Richard had been planning to destroy her to cover his own tax evasion. Her phone buzzed. A text message from a number she didn't recognize. Asterisk Ms. Chen, this is Robert Hammond. You have 18 hours remaining to sign the settlement agreement. I strongly advise you to comply. The alternative will be very unpleasant for you. Asterisk. 18 hours. Grace looked at the evidence spread across the table. The proof that Richard had been evading taxes. That the stolen money was really just altered records of legitimate expenses. But would it be enough? Hammond had an entire law firm. Richard had money and power and respect. Grace had spreadsheets and email archives and her own word. Who would believe her? Her phone buzzed again. Another text. This time from cousin Brandon. Asterisk Grace, I'm sorry it came to this. But you need to sign the agreement. For your own good. Don't make this worse than it already is. Asterisk. Then Kyle. Asterisk just sign it, Grace. Move on. Start over. Prison isn't worth it. Asterisk. Then Aunt Susan. Asterisk please, Grace. Do the right thing. Admit what you did and make it right. Asterisk. One by one. Family members telling her to confess. To lie. To give up. Because they all believed she was guilty. Grace looked around her grandmother's house. At the walls that had protected her. At the furniture where Lynn had sat and told her she was proud. At the photos of 18 years of family gatherings where Grace had smiled and helped and given everything she had. All of it about to be taken away. By people who'd never valued her. Who'd never seen her as anything but a useful tool. Grace felt something crack inside her. Not break. Not shatter. Crack. Like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Like the moment when something that's been compressed too long finally releases. She stood up. Walked to the kitchen. Made a fresh pot of coffee. Came back to the dining room. Opened her laptop. And started making a list. Not of evidence. Not of proof. Not of legal arguments. A list of every single lie Richard had built. Every piece of fabricated evidence. Every forged document. And next to each lie, the truth. With timestamps. With original files. With irrefutable documentation. Then she made a second list. Every transfer Richard had made to Chen Holdings International. Every undisclosed offshore account. Every violation of tax law. Evidence that would interest the IRS very much. Then she made a third list. Attorneys. Not the kind like Hammond who represented wealthy clients in expensive offices. The other kind. The ones who fought. The ones who took on corporations and won. The ones who specialized in whistleblower cases and financial fraud. Grace's grandmother had once told her, "You're honest to your bones, Bao Bei. Never let anyone take that from you." They could take her house, her money, her career, her reputation. But they couldn't make her lie. They couldn't make her confess to crimes she didn't commit. They couldn't take her truth. Grace picked up her phone, ignored all the texts from family members telling her to give up, and started calling attorneys. The first 3 didn't answer. It was 4 in the morning. The fourth one, his voicemail said he specialized in financial fraud defense and whistleblower protection. Grace left a message. Detailed. Professional. Explaining that she had evidence of tax evasion, falsified documents, and that she was being framed for embezzlement by the person actually committing crimes. She mentioned the dollar amounts, the timeline, the complexity. Then she added, "I have 18 years of immaculate records proving my innocence. And I have evidence that will interest the IRS. I need help, please." She hung up and sat back down at the dining room table. 15 hours left until Hammond's deadline. Grace opened a new document on her laptop, and she started writing. Not a confession. Not a settlement. Not an acceptance of lies. A counter-narrative. A detailed timeline of Richard's tax evasion. A comprehensive analysis of the forged documents. A point-by-point destruction of every piece of evidence Hammond had presented. 18 years of being the family accountant had taught Grace how to build financial arguments. Now she'd use those skills to defend herself. The sun rose outside the windows. Grace didn't notice. She worked through the morning, through the afternoon. At 2 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Ms. Chen? This is Martin Cooper. I got your voicemail. I've been practicing financial fraud defense for 23 years. What you described, if you actually have the documentation you claim, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of framing I've ever heard. Can you come to my office? Now?" Grace looked at the clock. 10 hours until Hammond's deadline. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. She gathered her laptop, her hard drives, and a box of the most critical physical documents. Took one last look at her grandmother's house. "I'm not giving up, Grandma," she whispered. "They can't make me lie. You taught me better than that." Grace walked out the door, got in her car, and drove toward the only thing that mattered anymore. Not her inheritance. Not her reputation. Not even her freedom. The truth. Whatever it cost, the truth. Martin Cooper's office was nothing like Hammond's gleaming downtown tower. It was in a converted brownstone in an older part of the city. Modest brick exterior. A brass plaque that had turned green with age. A waiting room with worn leather chairs and walls covered in framed newspaper articles about cases won. Grace walked in carrying her box of evidence like it was the only thing keeping her afloat. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, looked up and smiled. "Grace Chen? Martin's expecting you. Go right in." The office door opened before Grace could knock. Martin Cooper was in his early 50s. Gray hair. Sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. Shirt sleeves rolled up. The look of someone who'd spent decades in trenches fighting battles no one else would take on. "Ms. Chen. Come in. Sit." His voice was brisk but not unkind. "You sounded desperate on that voicemail. And if half of what you told me is true, you have every right to be. Show me what you have." Grace set the box on his desk, opened her laptop, and for the next 2 hours, she walked him through everything. The 18 years of managing family finances. The doctored bank statements. The forged signatures. The offshore accounts she'd never opened. Richard's hidden LLC. The undisclosed transfers. The tax evasion. Martin listened. Made notes. Asked sharp questions. Pulled up files on his own computer to cross-reference what Grace was telling him. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "Ms. Chen, in 23 years of practicing law, I've seen maybe 5 cases with evidence this comprehensive. Most people who get framed, they don't have anything to fight back with. But you." He gestured at the documents covering his desk. "You documented everything. Every transaction. Every communication. Every decision. It's beautiful." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "So you believe me?" "Believe you?" Martin shook his head. "Ms. Chen, belief has nothing to do with it. I don't need to believe you. The evidence speaks for itself. These bank statements Richard's lawyer presented? They're forgeries. Not even particularly good ones. The timestamps don't match. The formatting is inconsistent with how that bank actually formats statements. A decent forensic accountant will tear these apart in about 30 seconds. He pulled up another file. And these offshore accounts supposedly in your name? I did a quick search while you were explaining. None of them actually exist. The account numbers don't match the format that bank uses. The routing codes are wrong. Someone created fake documents, but they didn't bother to research what real documents from those institutions look like. Grace felt something loosen in her chest. So I can prove they're fake? You can prove they're fake. Easily. But here's the more interesting question. Martin leaned forward. Why did Richard think he could get away with such obvious forgeries? Because he thought I wouldn't fight, Grace said quietly. He thought I'd just sign the confession and walk away. Give up my grandmother's house and disappear. Exactly. He was counting on you being too scared or too overwhelmed to look closely at the evidence. To just accept what a fancy attorney in a downtown office told you. Martin's expression hardened. Men like Richard Chen, they underestimate people. Especially people they think are beneath them. He saw you as the quiet family accountant. The one who never made waves. Never asked for anything. He thought you'd roll over. I almost did, Grace admitted. I almost signed. But you didn't. You fought. And now? Martin started organizing documents into neat piles. Now we're going to destroy him. Grace looked up sharply. Destroy him? Ms. Chen. Grace. Richard didn't just try to frame you for embezzlement. He committed multiple felonies in the process. Document forgery. Identity theft. False statements to law enforcement. And that's before we even get to his tax evasion. When we're done, Richard won't just lose this case. He'll be facing criminal charges himself. Martin pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're not signing anything. Let Hammond's deadline pass. Let him file his criminal complaint. We want him to. Because the moment he does, every piece of evidence becomes part of an official investigation. And investigators will look at the documents forensically. Won't I be arrested? Possibly. Briefly. But with the evidence we have, you'll be released immediately. No prosecutor will touch this case once they see what we show them. And then, Martin smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Then we go on offense. He started ticking off on his fingers. We file a complaint with the IRS about Richard's unreported offshore transfers. $2.8 million in undisclosed income? They'll be very interested. We file a complaint with the State Accounting Board, but against the forensic accountant who verified Richard's fake documents without doing basic due diligence. We file a civil suit against Richard for defamation, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we make sure every single family member who participated in that ambush meeting knows they could be liable as co-conspirators. Grace felt dizzy. That's a lot. That's justice, Martin said firmly. You spent 18 years building their wealth for free. Richard tried to frame you for crimes to cover his own illegal activity. He tried to steal your grandmother's house. He destroyed your reputation. Turned your entire family against you. Grace, this man tried to put you in prison for 15 to 20 years for crimes you didn't commit. We're not playing nice. He pulled out a retainer agreement. My fee is 40% of whatever we recover in the civil suit. Plus, if the IRS rewards you for the whistleblower tip about Richard's tax evasion, standard whistleblower awards are 15 to 30% of recovered funds. If the IRS collects the back taxes and penalties Richard owes, you could be looking at a substantial recovery. I don't want money, Grace said. I just want people to know I didn't steal. I want my reputation back. You'll get both, Martin promised. But Grace, you're also going to get compensated for what was done to you. Richard has assets. Lots of them. When we sue him for defamation and fraud, we're going after everything. The restaurants. The house. The offshore accounts. All of it. You earned that money over 18 years of unpaid labor. Now you're going to collect. Grace thought about her grandmother. About what Lynn would say. Asterisk, never let anyone take your honesty, Bao Bei. Asterisk. But Lynn had also been practical. She'd worked double shifts for decades. She'd known the value of money, and the importance of standing up for yourself. Okay, Grace said. What do we do first? Martin checked his watch. Hammond's deadline is in. He calculated. 7 hours. We're going to let it pass. But before it does, we're going to prepare. I need you to go home, go to your grandmother's house, since that's where your records are, and organize everything chronologically. Every transaction Richard claims was theft. I need your original documentation proving what it really was. Can you do that? I can do that in my sleep. I'm an accountant. Good. While you're doing that, I'm calling in favors. I know a forensic accountant who specializes in document fraud. I know an IRS investigator who owes me. And I know a prosecutor at the DA's office who hates wealthy people who think they can buy their way out of consequences. By tomorrow morning, we're going to have an army. Grace stood up, feeling something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Real hope. Mr. Cooper. Martin. Thank you. For believing, for seeing the evidence. Grace. He walked her to the door. I've been doing this a long time. I've seen real criminals. People who lie and manipulate and destroy others without remorse. You're not that. You're a woman who gave up everything to help her family, and they tried to destroy you for it. We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Go. Organize those files. I'll call you in 3 hours with an update. Grace drove back to her grandmother's house with her hand steady on the wheel for the first time in days. She had 7 hours until Hammond's deadline. 7 hours to organize 18 years of evidence. She could do this. Grace worked with the precision of someone who'd spent their entire career organizing financial chaos into clear narratives. She created a master spreadsheet. Every transaction Richard claimed was theft got its own row. Date. Amount. What the forged document said. What the real transaction was. Supporting documentation reference numbers. One by one. Dozens of them. For each forged statement, she pulled her original. Saved them as individual PDF files with clear naming conventions. Cross-referenced everything. By the time Martin called 3 hours later, Grace had created a prosecutorial roadmap. A document so clear and comprehensive that anyone could follow the trail from Richard's lies to the truth. Grace, it's Martin. How's it going? I have everything organized. 73 separate instances where Richard's documents don't match reality. Every single one documented with original bank statements, receipts, invoices, and correspondence. I can prove every transaction was legitimate. Excellent. Now, I've made calls. The forensic accountant will be at my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Can you be there with all your files? I'll be there. Good. I also spoke to my contact at the IRS. Confidentially. Told him there might be a significant whistleblower case coming his way. He's interested. Very interested. Once we file the formal complaint, they'll open an investigation into Richard's offshore transfers. Grace felt her heart racing. How long does that take? IRS investigations? Could be months. Could be years. But here's the thing, once they open an investigation, it becomes public record. Richard's business partners will find out. His investors will find out. His reputation will be destroyed long before any charges are filed. And that's separate from our civil case, which we'll file as soon as we have the forensic analysis complete. What about the criminal charges he threatened? The embezzlement accusations? Hammond's deadline passes in 4 hours. He'll file his complaint. Then, Martin paused. Then I'm going to call in a favor with that prosecutor I mentioned. Get ahead of this. Show her everything we have. By the time Richard's complaint hits her desk, she'll already know it's garbage. She'll decline to prosecute. Might even open an investigation into Richard for filing a false report. Grace closed her eyes. This is really happening. We're really fighting back. We're not fighting back, Grace. We're bringing down the hammer of justice. There's a difference. Fighting back is defensive. What we're doing. This is offensive. Total warfare. Richard tried to destroy you. We're going to destroy him. After Martin hung up, Grace sat at her grandmother's dining room table, surrounded by evidence and truth. Her phone started buzzing. Text messages. Family members. Asterisk Grace, time's almost up. Just sign the papers. Asterisk. Asterisk why are you being so stubborn? Just admit what you did. Asterisk. Asterisk you're making this so much harder than it needs to be. Asterisk. Grace looked at the messages. At the family that had abandoned her. That had believed lies over 18 years of devoted service. She typed one message. Sent it to all of them. Asterisk I didn't steal anything. I will never confess to crimes I didn't commit. The truth will come out. And when it does, you'll all owe me an apology. But I won't be waiting for it. Goodbye. Asterisk. Then she blocked every number. Every single one. They'd made their choice. Now Grace was making hers. She wasn't their doormat anymore. Wasn't their free labor. Wasn't their scapegoat. She was Grace Chen. Certified public accountant. Honest to her bones. and she had 18 years of evidence proving it. At exactly 6 p.m., Hammond's deadline passed. Grace sat at the dining room table and waited. Her phone rang at 6:15. Unknown number. Ms. Chen? This is Robert Hammond. You failed to meet the deadline. I'm filing criminal charges tomorrow morning. You've made a terrible mistake. Grace took a breath. Martin had coached her on this. Mr. Hammond, I have retained counsel. Martin Cooper will be representing me. All future communication should go through him. And Mr. Hammond? You might want to have your forensic accountant actually verify those documents before you file anything. Because when this falls apart, and it will, you're going to have some very uncomfortable questions to answer about your due diligence. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking. But it was adrenaline now, not fear. Her phone rang again immediately. Martin. Grace, did Hammond call? Just now. I told him what you said. Perfect. He's going to be very nervous tonight, wondering what we know. Tomorrow morning, he'll file his complaint because he's already committed. He can't back down without looking weak to Richard. But that's exactly what we want. Once those forged documents are part of an official investigation, the truth comes out fast. Martin, what if we're wrong? What if somehow? Grace, stop. We're not wrong. I've reviewed everything. You're innocent. Richard is guilty. The evidence is overwhelming. Tomorrow, we go to war. Get some sleep. You're going to need your energy. Grace hung up and looked around her grandmother's house. She'd spent 3 days here. 3 days organizing the evidence that would save her life. But she couldn't stay. Not tonight. Not with everything happening tomorrow. She packed up her laptop and the most critical documents. Locked the door carefully. Drove back to her own small apartment for the first time in days. The apartment felt different. Smaller somehow. But also, hers. Grace made tea. Sat on her couch. Tried to watch television but couldn't focus. Tomorrow, everything would change. Either she'd be vindicated, or she'd be arrested. Either the truth would set her free, or Richard's lies would destroy her. Grace thought about her grandmother. About 18 years of sacrifice. About every hour she'd spent building other people's dreams while putting her own life on hold. I hope I'm making you proud, Grandma, she whispered to the empty apartment. I hope standing up for the truth is enough. I hope. Her phone buzzed. A text from Martin. Asterisk, the prosecutor just called me. She reviewed the documents I sent. She said, and I quote, "This is the sloppiest attempted frame job I've seen in 15 years. We've got her. Sleep well, Grace. Tomorrow, we win." Asterisk. Grace read the message 3 times. Then she set down her phone. Turned off the lights. Got into bed. And for the first time in a week, she slept. Not peacefully. Not dreamlessly. But she slept knowing that tomorrow, the truth would finally speak louder than the lies. That 18 years of meticulous documentation would prove stronger than Richard's forged papers. That honesty, real honesty, was worth fighting for. Whatever came next, Grace was ready. Grace woke at 6 a.m. to 17 missed calls. All from family members. All panicking. She ignored them and got dressed. Professional suit. The good one she'd been saving. Hair pulled back. Minimal makeup. She looked like what she was, a certified public accountant preparing to defend her reputation. Martin had texted at 5:30 a.m., asterisk, meet at my office. 8 a.m., bring everything. The forensic accountant is early and excited. He said Richard's forgeries are comically bad. This is going to be a good day. Asterisk. Grace arrived at 7:45. Martin was already there with a man in his 60s wearing a bow tie and an expression of pure intellectual glee. Grace Chen, meet Dr. Howard Lin, forensic accountant. 30 years with the FBI. Retired now but still consults on complex fraud cases. Howard, this is Grace. Dr. Lin shook her hand enthusiastically. Ms. Chen, I've been reviewing your documents since 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep. This is extraordinary work. Your record-keeping is impeccable. Museum-quality documentation. And the forgeries your uncle created? He actually laughed. They're terrible. Whoever made them didn't understand basic banking protocols. Wrong fonts. Incorrect formatting. Timestamps that don't match transaction dates. I can prove they're fake in about 40 different ways. Grace felt her knees go weak with relief. So you can testify to that? Testify? Ms. Chen, I'm going to write a report so comprehensive that no prosecutor, judge, or jury will have any doubt whatsoever. These forgeries are offensive to anyone who understands financial documentation. Your uncle essentially created the accounting equivalent of a $3 bill and expected people to accept it as real. Martin gestured them to his conference room. Okay, here's where we are. Hammond filed his criminal complaint this morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Right on schedule. The complaint alleges embezzlement, fraud, and theft. It includes all of Richard's forged documents as evidence. Grace's stomach clenched. So I'm officially accused? You're officially accused, Martin confirmed. Which means the investigation is now active. Which means we can now present our counter-evidence to the prosecutor. I have a meeting with Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Morris at 10 a.m. You, me, and Dr. Lin are going to walk her through everything. By noon, this will be over. Over? Over. She'll decline to prosecute. Probably open an investigation into Richard. The whole thing falls apart. Martin checked his watch. We have 90 minutes. Howard, can you finish your preliminary report? Already done. 32 pages. I can expand it if needed, but the summary is simple. These are forgeries. Clumsy ones. Any competent forensic examination would reveal them immediately. He handed Martin a bound document. I've also identified something interesting. The forged documents all came from the same printer. Same paper stock. Same toner signature. If we can get access to Richard's office equipment, I can probably prove he printed them himself. Grace stared at the report. 32 pages proving her innocence. Written in 4 hours by a man who'd never met her before yesterday. The truth really did have power when you had someone who knew how to present it. At 10 a.m., they walked into the district attorney's office. ADA Jennifer Morris was in her 40s. Sharp suit. Sharper eyes. The look of someone who'd seen every con and scam the world had to offer and was perpetually unimpressed. She gestured them to seats in her office. Mr. Cooper. You said you had evidence that would interest me regarding the Chen embezzlement complaint. I've reviewed the complaint that was filed this morning. On its face, it looks substantial. Multiple forged bank statements. Offshore accounts. Years of alleged theft. Make your case. Martin slid Dr. Lin's report across her desk. This is a forensic analysis by Dr. Howard Lin, former FBI. 30 years of experience in financial fraud investigation. He examined the documents Richard Chen submitted as evidence. All of them are forgeries. Morris raised an eyebrow. All of them? Every single one, Dr. Lin said. The bank statements are fake, wrong formatting, incorrect fonts, impossible timestamps. The offshore account numbers don't match real banking protocols. The signatures are traced, not original. And most damningly, they all came from the same printer, which I'm confident we can trace to Richard Chen's office if given access. Morris opened the report. Started reading. Her expression shifted from skeptical to surprised to angry. She read for 10 minutes in silence. Then she looked up at Grace. Ms. Chen, do you have the original bank statements for these transactions? Grace opened her laptop. Every single one. Downloaded directly from the bank's secure portal at the time of the transactions. With metadata showing when they were downloaded and from what IP address. I have 18 years of records organized chronologically. Every transaction Mr. Chen claims was theft was actually a legitimate business expense. I have invoices, receipts, and correspondence proving it. Morris looked at Martin. Why didn't she come forward with this immediately? Because she was threatened with 15 to 20 years in prison if she didn't confess and sign over her inheritance, Martin said flatly. Richard Chen and his attorney gave her 48 hours to decide. Sign a confession and walk away, or face criminal prosecution. They were banking on her being too scared to fight back. Instead, she documented everything and called you, Morris said. She looked at Grace with something like respect. Ms. Chen, you're an accountant? Yes, ma'am. Certified public accountant. I managed my family's finances for 18 years. Free of charge. As a favor to my grandmother who raised me. And your uncle thanked you by trying to frame you for embezzlement. Morris closed the report. Leaned back in her chair. I'm not prosecuting this case. The evidence is clearly fabricated. Moreover, I'm opening an investigation into Richard Chen for filing a false police report, document forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. So I'm cleared? You were never really under suspicion, Ms. Chen. Not once I saw this. Morris tapped the report. Forgeries this obvious? Any competent prosecutor would have seen through them immediately. Richard Chen was counting on intimidation to work. It didn't. You fought back. And now he's going to face consequences. Martin leaned forward. There's more. Richard has been evading taxes. Transferring money to offshore LLCs without proper disclosure. Grace has documentation of $2.8 million in unreported transfers. Morris's expression hardened. That's federal IRS jurisdiction. But I can coordinate with them. Do you have evidence? Grace pulled out another file. Complete documentation. Every transfer. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The LLC was never disclosed on his tax returns, which I filed for him based on information he provided. He deliberately withheld the offshore transfers. So he's been committing tax fraud while framing you for theft. Morris shook her head. Some people are staggeringly stupid. Ms. Chen, I need you to file a formal complaint with the IRS. I'll provide a referral to their criminal investigation division. They'll want to talk to you. I'm happy to cooperate fully. Morris stood up. Mr. Cooper, I'm dismissing the charges. Officially. As of now. I'll have the paperwork ready within the hour. Ms. Chen, you're free to go. I'd suggest you consider filing a civil suit against your uncle for defamation and fraud. You have an excellent case. Already planning to, Martin said. We're going after everything. The restaurants. The house. All of it. He tried to destroy her life. We're going to destroy his bank account. Morris almost smiled. Good. I like to see bullies get what they deserve. Ms. Chen, you're a brave woman. Most people would have folded under this kind of pressure. You didn't. That's admirable. They walked out of the DA's office at 11:15 a.m. Grace stood on the sidewalk in the autumn sunshine, unable to process what had just happened. It's over, she whispered. Just like that? Just like that, Martin confirmed. The criminal case is dead. Now we focus on the civil case and the IRS complaint. Which, frankly, is where the real damage gets done. Richard's about to have a very bad year. Grace's phone started ringing. Family members. Still calling. She answered one. Cousin Brandon. Grace. We heard Hammond filed charges. You need to. The charges were dismissed, Grace said calmly. About an hour ago. The prosecutor reviewed the evidence and determined that Uncle Richard forged everything. She's now investigating him for filing false reports and document fraud. I'm also filing a complaint with the IRS about his tax evasion. And I'm suing him for defamation and fraud. I suggest you distance yourself from him. Immediately. Silence on the other end. Grace, you're serious? Completely serious. Uncle Richard tried to frame me for $3 million in theft to cover his own tax evasion. He forged documents. Created fake offshore accounts in my name. Threatened me with prison. All of it was lies. And I have 18 years of documentation proving it. The forensic accountant's report is 32 pages long. Every piece of Richard's evidence is fake. Every piece of mine is real. Goodbye, Brandon. She hung up, called Kyle next. Said the same thing. Then Aunt Susan. Then the cousins whose businesses she'd built. One by one. Some of them stammered apologies. Some of them went silent. Some of them tried to defend Richard. Grace didn't care anymore. She'd told them the truth. What they did with it was their problem. 2 weeks later, the civil suit was filed. Grace Chen versus Richard Chen. Defamation. Fraud. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Demanding compensatory and punitive damages. Martin had been thorough. The complaint was 93 pages long. It detailed every lie. Every forged document. Every threat. Every family member who'd participated in the ambush meeting. It also included Dr. Lin's forensic report as an exhibit. And Grace's 18 years of financial records. And the IRS complaint she'd filed. The complaint was filed in civil court at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. By noon, Richard's attorney Robert Hammond had called Martin 6 times begging for a settlement discussion. Martin ignored all of them. At 2 p.m., Hammond showed up at Martin's office unannounced. We need to talk, he said, looking haggard. My client is willing to discuss terms. Your client tried to put my client in prison for 15 years, Martin said coldly. There are no terms. We're going to trial. We're going to win. And we're going to take everything he has. Get out of my office. Martin, be reasonable. Richard made mistakes, yes, but... Mistakes? Martin stood up. He forged documents. Filed false police reports. Committed identity theft. Evaded millions in taxes. Terrorized a woman who spent 18 years building his wealth for free. Those aren't mistakes, Hammond. That's systematic fraud. And you helped him. You presented forged documents as evidence without doing basic due diligence. The state bar is going to be very interested in your conduct. Hammond went pale. You're reporting me? Already did. Last week. Grace is filing a separate complaint against you for legal malpractice and conspiracy to commit fraud. You're going to lose your license, Hammond. Just like Richard is going to lose everything. Now get out. Hammond left without another word. The IRS investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 3 weeks, federal agents raided Richard's restaurants, seized computers, froze accounts, interviewed employees. The investigation was public record. The media picked it up. Prominent restaurateur under investigation for tax evasion. Restaurant owner accused of hiding millions offshore. Chen family empire faces federal fraud probe. Richard's investors pulled out. His business partners distanced themselves. His 7 restaurants started hemorrhaging money. Within 2 months, he'd filed for bankruptcy. His house went into foreclosure. His cars were repossessed. His wife Maureen filed for divorce and moved to Florida with their sons. The family that had gathered in Hammond's office to accuse Grace, they scattered. Some tried to reach out to Grace. To apologize. To explain they'd been manipulated by Richard. Grace didn't respond to any of them. She was busy building a new life. 6 months after the accusations, the civil case went to trial. It lasted 3 days. Martin presented Dr. Lynn's forensic analysis. The jury listened with increasing horror as he explained how the forgeries had been created. How clumsy they were. How obvious it should have been to anyone who looked carefully. Grace testified. Calm. Professional. Walking the jury through 18 years of devoted service. Showing them her meticulous records. Explaining how she'd sacrificed her career, her relationships, her entire life, to help family. And how Richard had tried to destroy her to cover his own crimes. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Compensatory damages, $1.2 million. Punitive damages, $3.5 million. Total, $4.7 million. Richard didn't have it anymore. The bankruptcy had wiped him out, but the judgment was on record. If he ever rebuilt his wealth, Grace would be first in line to collect. More importantly, the judgment was public. Everyone knew what he'd done. Everyone knew Grace was innocent. Her reputation was restored. The IRS concluded their investigation 8 months after Grace filed her complaint. Richard Chen owed $5.3 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. He'd never be able to pay it. He'd spend the rest of his life under IRS collection orders. Wages garnished. Assets seized. Never able to rebuild. And Grace received a whistleblower award, 15% of what the IRS recovered. The check arrived on a Tuesday morning. $795,000. Grace stared at it for a long time. Then she called Martin. I want to do something with this money. Something meaningful. I was thinking, a foundation. For people who get framed for financial crimes. Legal defense fund. Expert witnesses. Help for people who can't afford to fight back the way I did. Grace Chen Legal Defense Foundation, Martin said. I like it. I'll help you set it up. Pro bono. You've earned it. 1 year after the accusations, Grace stood in her grandmother's house. She'd kept it. Not because she needed it, but because it represented everything important. Love. Sacrifice. Truth. She'd converted the dining room, the room where she'd organized evidence to save her life, into an office. Headquarters for her foundation and her new private accounting practice. She didn't work for family anymore. She worked for clients who valued expertise and honesty. Small businesses. Nonprofits. People who couldn't afford the big firms but deserved excellent service. Her practice was thriving. Her foundation had already helped 6 people fight false accusations. Her life was hers. Grace walked through the house, touching the furniture her grandmother had loved. Looking at the photos on the walls. Remembering. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Grace, this is Uncle Richard. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know. I'm sorry. For all of it. You were the best person in this family. The only one who truly cared. And I tried to destroy you. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. I don't expect you to respond. I just needed you to know. I'm sorry. Grace read the message twice. Then she deleted it without responding. Some apologies came too late. Some bridges burned beyond repair. Richard had made his choices. Now he lived with the consequences. Grace made different choices. And she was living with different consequences. Freedom. Peace. A life built on truth instead of lies. She walked to her grandmother's bedroom. The room where Lynn had passed away peacefully. Where Grace had said goodbye to the only person who'd ever truly seen her. "I did it, Grandma," Grace whispered. "I stayed honest. Just like you taught me. And it saved me. The truth saved me." She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. "I'm proud of you, Baobei. So proud." Grace smiled, wiped away tears, turned off the lights, locked the door, and drove home to her new apartment, the nicer one she could finally afford, where she'd built a life that was finally, completely, authentically hers. 3 years later, Grace received a wedding invitation. Cousin Brandon was getting married. The invitation included a handwritten note. Grace, I know I don't deserve your presents after what I did. How I believed Richard's lies. How I abandoned you when you needed family most. But you should know, you inspired me. Watching you fight back. Watching you refuse to accept lies. It made me reevaluate everything. I left the family business. Started over. Built something honest. And I'm marrying someone who reminds me of you. Someone honest to their bones. I don't expect you to come. But I wanted you to know. You changed my life by refusing to let lies define yours. Thank you. Brandon *. Grace thought about it for a long time. Then she RSVP'd. Yes. She'd attend. Not because she'd forgiven everything. Not because the past didn't matter. But because holding on to anger forever only poisoned your own life. And Grace had worked too hard building something new to let bitterness destroy it. She went to the wedding. Sat in the back. Watched Brandon marry a woman who looked at him the way Grace's grandmother had looked at the people she loved. With honesty. With trust. After the ceremony, Brandon approached her. "Grace. You came. I didn't think. You said she reminds you of me," Grace said simply. "Someone honest to their bones. That's the best compliment I've ever received. I hope you build something real together. Something worth fighting for. We will. Thanks to you. I know what that looks like now." Grace left the reception early. Drove back to her grandmother's house where her foundation office was buzzing with activity. 3 staff members helping another falsely accused person prepare their defense. This was her life now. Not the family accountant who gave everything and got nothing, but Grace Chen, founder, advocate, fighter. Someone who'd stood up to lies and won. Someone who'd proven that honesty, real honesty, backed up with 18 years of meticulous documentation, could change everything. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, started reviewing a new case. And somewhere, she knew her grandmother was smiling. That's my girl. Honest to the bones. Never let them take it from you. Grace never had. Grace never would. Thank you for walking this treacherous road with Grace to the very end. If this story resonated with you, you can support our community by sending a super thanks. It helps me continue to bring these important stories to light. On the screen now are 2 more stories that I know will touch your soul. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong.